least we heard something about transit in this transit session. And it was very nice. I'm impressed with the area. I really, really am. I had a whole different mental image of Fayetteville in Arkansas before coming here. And my bailiwick is affordable housing. It's been for most of my life. And I was somewhat intimidated to read that Northwest Arkansas was the most affordable region in the country, or one of the most affordable regions in the country. And yet here we are, because we're in the United States. And saying that Northwest Arkansas is among the most affordable regions in the country is like pointing to the cheapest rent in Beverly Hills. It's still too much. So we're here because we know it's not affordable enough, in great part, right? I've spent the better part of my life doing work in affordable housing. I've built a lot of it, developed a lot of very affordable neighborhoods. I have written 6 books on affordable housing and spent quite a bit of time researching and meeting with developers of affordable housing to learn the best tips and techniques. And I can tell you, though, over these years, that the road hasn't gotten any smoother. With each iteration of the building code, with each comp plan, as each year passes, and things change, they don't change for the better. Maybe now they're changing for the better. Hearing all of you speak makes me realize that maybe we're over the hill, we're headed down, where we can actually reach some solutions. Because so far, every change has made housing more difficult to attain. It's been a big hurdle. What began as a building code, a zoning code meant to guarantee minimum standards of safety, of health, has just become kind of a huge hurdle to get over in trying to deliver affordable housing. To it, I spent the last year rewriting and updating a book that I published in 2005 called Building an Affordable House. And it's going to be here, it's about to be released by the Taunton Press at the beginning of the year, second edition. But even in the writing of it, I felt somewhat like a fraud. Like, I'm really going to tell people you can do this because you really can't do it anymore. And realizing that just a home building centered approach isn't enough. It doesn't yield affordable housing. I had a call from Andres Duani, who said, you've got this book on affordable housing, and he had written the foreword for it, so we were talking about it. And there's this other book on development, and this other, I said, there's all these resources, but we need to combine them into one list, into one place. And this is something I've discussed with Luke, too. One place where a developer or a community can go and say, okay, we want affordable housing, here's all the stuff, here's all the elements. What can the government do? What can the developer do? What can the designers do? What can the home builders do? So that got me thinking, this is not a good book for publication. Nobody will want to publish this book. I'm used to writing and getting paid. So this is not something anybody wants to pay for. It's going to be a labor of love. And as a labor of love, I've started now for several months actually compiling what we're calling tentatively the Comprehensive Guide to Affordable Housing for Planners, Designers, and Engineers. And this is not a consumer volume. This is somewhat of a technical and advanced volume that does exactly what Andres was asking for, compile everything into one place. So you have not just a roadmap, but you have like engineering about how to run the sewer line. And some of what's encompassed in this is, some of it's just a list, what to ask the city for, what can government do? Some of it is a list, what can your designer do? Educate the architect as to these are the parameters for designing something that's affordable to build. We have a series of appendices in this volume, which includes things like a model ADU code. In case the city doesn't have one, here's a model code you can use. It's good when you start these dialogues, not just to talk abstractly, and then the city's got to scratch its head and figure out, this sounds good, how do we do it? Well, here's a model based on what other cities have done. We have a strange new thing, an act that DPZ, the architectural planning firm, Miami, DPZ, put together for, after Katrina, for New Orleans, called the Self-Built Housing Zone. The Self-Built Housing Zone was a kind of a permit that allowed people to build their own house without all the bureaucratic hurdles. My own gardener, I found out, had built his house, pretty nice house. He doesn't speak a word of English. So I began to interview him, like, how'd you do it? How did you get around all? Oh, he says, I live in Montgomery, I didn't need a building permit. I just did it in cash. This is common throughout South America. It used to be common in the United States. People would build their own house with cash, and they didn't have all of these difficulties, especially the immigrant population. The immigrant population knows how to build. They do all the building, in fact. For most of you, I'm sure, they're doing the building today. They have friends in the building industry. What they don't know how to do is pull a building permit and deal with all the regulatory permits. So the Self-Built Housing Zone, right? We have an act on how to speed up the whole development approval process. How do you do that? Originally developed by HUD. The city can do these things to make development approval for housing much faster. We have that in there. We have a section that is going to be proposed as an appendix to the building code, to the residential code. The residential code, you know, it gets bigger and bigger and more complex, and now you have to cross-reference with the IECC and the energy code to the, you know, it's really become something that you almost need a civil engineer to interpret the code. That's not the original intent. The original intent was to make it really easy for guys like me to build houses following this prescriptive method. Now, in the building code, people have managed to put in straw bale houses. How many are there? There's a straw bale section. There's a 3D printed section. There is a tiny house section in the building code. These are pendant. Why isn't there an affordable house section in the building code? So I engaged a fellow that's quite expert in building to help me, and to help me with kind of designing an appendix in the building code for affordable housing. These are the things we need to relax in the body of the code. And also a cross-reference. There are many, many elements in the building code, approved, sanctioned, proven, engineered, accepted by consensus, that nobody uses. I've never met an architect that knows about them. I'm informing them. I've never met a building official that knows about them. I'm always coming in, I'm saying, you know, but this is in your code. I'm not just inventing this. It's right there. Oh, is it? Wow, I never saw that. So there's a cross-reference saying, be aware that these things exist, and there are opportunities within the existing code to make home building or construction in general a little bit less expensive, but stuff that's sanctioned. It's not some weird alternative method. And one of the highlights in this is a rather large appendix that's called HUD's Proposed Model Development Standards for Affordable Housing. In the 1980s, builders began to have to get away from what they used to call starter homes. In fact, the main business of developers for a long time was starter homes. Then they had a little side business, middle class and more expensive housing. The whole reason for tract housing and all of that was efficiency in construction to create less expensive housing. Well, as time went on and land prices went up and regulatory hurdles became greater, that began to end. And HUD was concerned up until this effort in the 1980s with affordable housing, and put together a luminary panel of folks to rewrite the development code so you could have a model development code that was geared towards affordability. And then they gave up, because even HUD has given up on affordable housing. There used to be a director of affordable housing. I was an advisor to the HUD's Office of Affordable Housing Research. It doesn't exist anymore. Not even HUD cares about affordable housing now. So now we have missing middle, i.e. middle class housing, workforce housing. Okay, kind of a euphemism for sort of affordable. Real affordable, nobody's doing it. But there's a good need for it. In fact, it's the majority of the need. And as things are going, all the techniques that used to go into starter homes maybe now need to go into that missing middle, because the housing price has gotten too high. So this book was done in the 1980s, the proposed development standards that HUD did with the National Association of Home Builders Research Center at the time. Now they're called Home Innovations Labs. They put this together. We're updating it. It was supposed to be updated, just like a model code, but it never was. So today, and Paul Crabtree, civil engineer that's a member of NTBA, and our own Lou Marquette is keenly involved and has spent hours on this manual. Right, Lou? Yeah, okay. And I'm hoping he will at some point. But he'll spend a little time. And now I bring this up to you all today because I can't think of a more learned, experienced audience than NTBA. And what I'm really hoping that all of you will do, well, I'm inviting all of you, but I'm actually hoping at least one or two of you will actually take that QR code to access the book, or to email me. My email address is up there on the board, and ask me for this guide, and I will send it to you. And what I'm hoping you'll do is look at it, critique it, add to it, give us feedback. This is a volunteer effort. Maybe you'll even get involved enough that you'll want to be part of the author of this manual, this guide. And it's the kind of thing that you can bring to your communities and say, well, here's a model code you might consider. Take a look at it. Perhaps there's some things in here that you want to do. And it's down to brass tacks. It'll talk about how to run the water lines, how to run the sewer lines. This is not just theoretical. It is a practical building code, essentially. So I hope that it adds a little bit to the map that we got here today on how to create communities that are affordable and well-connected for all of us.
I was not in any profession allied to anything that we are talking about today or anything any of the rest of you do. My first career was in the arts. I ran theater companies for 30 years, and my view of restaurant, retail, downtowns is we're putting on a show, and we forget that at our peril. And it's just like putting on a show. You have to figure out what your product is. You have to put all the pieces, sets, costumes, marketing around it. You have to create a very, very memorable experience for the user, so memorable that they want to come back and do it again. That's putting on a show. That's also inviting somebody to eat at your restaurant or shop at your shop. And what all the trend data tells us is that retail is not dead, but as our good friend Bob Gibbs says, boring retail is dead. And so it should be, and we're still seeing closures. They announced today that they're going to close hundreds of Rite Aid stores because Rite Aid is looking at bankruptcy, partly due to opioid penalties, but also just because they're not running good stores. We saw Bed Bath & Beyond close. Those became very bad stores. We're going to see, and I'm sad to say this because it's a hometown closure, but within 10 years, I'm not sure we'll have Macy's. What we will have is high street retail, high street restaurants. And again, the trend data tells us that our consumers falling down from the baby boomers to Generation Alpha, there's a great interest in being part of small shops, authentic restaurants. They're not going away, they're going toward online retail, but they're not going away from brick and mortar retail. And they're certainly going away in many cases from the kind of restaurants, especially in the high street environment, that have populated our landscape and our highway exits for the last 35 years. So it's a changing environment, but it's one that actually probably favors all of you and the work we do, which I should say does not make it any easier. It is brutally difficult to operate high street retail and high street restaurants. It is extraordinarily sensitive to every change in the wind. My restaurant and retail clients are telling me that their numbers are going down this year for no good reason that they can ascertain. We know that in terms of retail, there's more spending on experience right now than there is on things, so that might hit the retail side of things. But restaurants, they're sensitive to not just to a recession, but just to the idea of a recession. My daughter, who works for YouTube, recently said something that I thought was surprisingly smart. She said, let's for God's sake have a recession. She said, the worst thing about a recession is the fear of it. She said, once we're in it, everybody thinks, oh, well, okay, I don't have to be afraid it's coming because it's here. And the recessions always end, and after they end, it's a while before we have the next one. So her attitude is, bring it on, let's have the damn recession. And I'm not sure she's wrong. It's the fear of the recession that slows everything down. But without question, it's slowing down, and these are environmentally sensitive operations. These are operations where 2 or 3 percentage points of sales is the difference between keeping your doors open and closing them. Between, frankly, keeping your staff and losing them, because especially your front of house staff, if tips go down, they move. They go someplace where they think tips will be better. And I really think it's interesting to hear that Arkansas is sales tax driven. Ohio communities, which is my base, Ohio cities are income tax driven. And that is an entirely different driver. But 2 more points here. The first one is whether it is sales tax or income tax driven, the business that we are in up here is not retail, it is not restaurant, it is talent retention and recruitment. Because we all know that it's the amenitization of life that anchors talent these days. Cincinnati is a big corporate community. We have more Fortune 1000 companies per capita than any other city than New York. So we are really about making sure that Procter Procter and Gamble and Kroger and Macy's and all our Fortune 1000s can recruit to Cincinnati. And 20 years ago, they told us that that was their number one problem, that they could not recruit to Cincinnati. And the second thing is the nature of downtowns is changing. And that is coming out of the pandemic. Cincinnati's downtown used to have 80,000 workers every single day. They ate lunch downtown. They went shopping downtown. They stopped for a drink after work downtown. Now we have maybe 50,000 workers Tuesday through Thursday. So our problems are Monday and Friday. The first problem we're going to solve is Saturday and Sunday, and we're going to do that because we're going to make downtown an entertainment center. Downtowns are going to be driven increasingly. The jobs are never going away in their entirety, but downtowns and town centers are going to be driven increasingly by residential and entertainment. And that is also going to change the nature of our business.
First of all, guys, thank you all for being here in Northwest Arkansas. Really, really appreciate both your wisdom that I've heard and your observations. So thank you for that very much for being here. I very much believe in systems work. We may apply very specifically on building to building, but without the systems, which inevitably are the things that beat us down on a regular basis, we have to address systems. So first and foremost, we talk about the hardware and software in place. And to your point, Ty, so many of these conversations about buildings or infrastructure or design, and that's only 50% of the equation. And I get really tired of being in rooms of people who are fixated on the built environment, but they forget the entirety of activation, right? We have to change the conversation in all the organizations you're a part of. Please, please, please. And I get it if you're a developer and architect, that's the world you work in, but you cannot dismiss the software side of this equation, period, end of story. So placemaking sits between the hardware and software. That's that Venn diagram, that's where we play. And you have to be able to understand the language of both to be successful in the placemaking realm, and that's the thing that's going forward. And if you're not able to code switch or switch the languages, start learning a new language, folks, because that's really, really important. The second thing I really like about the conversation of theater, I too have a theater background. You can tell I'm a Jameer Wallflower and have a difficult time kind of coming out, but my process is actually named for that. It's called the Theater of Cool, and the reason why is because you look at the context and then go all the way down to the base application of that context. So I talked about stage, set, props, and actors. The stage is your downtown or is whatever. You were in Bentonville, that downtown stage was 1,765 acres. Now it's a huge downtown. You cannot address all of that the same way. So then we break it down into sort of a block, street, and building element because that compels people to move around. It's about 90 some odd linear feet that you need to be able to engage people, because after that 90 feet, they're like, I'm bored, I'm done. So how do you engage people every block or two to move around? What do you put on the corner? What do you put here? So that context is really, really important. And it's even more important for your restaurants and retail, right? Because you could have a great restaurant out in the middle of nowhere, and the entire burden of that application of destination falls on that small business. And they're already dealing and fighting really, really hard to get attention. So context is vitally important for the stuff we're talking about with restaurant and retail. On the set piece, and we talk about, yes, I'm going to see a Broadway show and it's Madame Butterfly. Why is Rent the background to Madame Butterfly? It completely screws you up, right? The story doesn't make any sense. Well, the same thing with communities, right? If you say you're a food community, or you say you're a walkable community, but you can't walk and it's not food oriented and all you have is McDonald's, guess what? That's the brand promise that is not realized. And so your set piece, which is the built environment, also has to be very much aligned. Then you start moving into props. Those are the fungible, tangible things that people engage with every single day, where you put your benches. There was a project in which they said, oh, I put a bench on the street. Well, guess what? It's looking at the side of a car. Why would anybody sit there? For a $250 fix, all we did is move the bench here, put another bench. Now you have communication between the two. That has a profound impact on the restaurant that was directly behind those two benches, because now you have an application. Now they can start doing cafe work now, but guess what we're dealing with? Cafe ordinances and ADA and all that other kind of stuff that comes with it. So, that sort of tangible thing that people engage with, where you place things and how you place things. And as much as a downtown person as I am, mall science does have some practical application in this world, right? It makes my eye twitch to think about it, but there's a reason why Talbot's is always where Talbot's is. There's a reason why these things exist, how do we scale up and scale down with some of those lessons learned, I think, and that's part of that whole props. But this doesn't work without people. So how do you engage the actors? Story and turning them into storytellers and engaging them. You can say you're awesome. Guess what? 20% of the people will agree. 80% will say you're bullshit. Right? If other people say you're awesome, that is the currency. And that is the currency of any retail and any restaurant and any system if other people are saying you're awesome. So how do you turn them on? And that is a whole other art and science. And so any one of these 4 realms, you can deep dive into the details of practical application. I know all 4 of us can talk about this as well as all of you. We don't have enough time to go into the full science of this, but that's why it's really important to understand there are 4 realms to this conversation. And as a restaurateur, I have to take all of that into consideration, as well as, I have beer that comes from Europe. What's the Ukraine doing to my beer supply? Like, global wars have an effect on my little bar. All right, I bring my sausages in from Milwaukee. Well, guess what? UPS threatened a strike. My costs went up 40% to get, and I can't pass that on to my customers because the context of Springdale, I can't charge $20 for a dang sausage sandwich. So these are the types of things, like I said, contextually speaking, restaurants and retail. And the last thing I'll share with you is time. Time is a currency. And we're working on food systems. Recognize that if you get a bunch of farmers and a bunch of retailers in the room and start talking, farmers think seasonally. You can't see a farmer and be like, ooh, could you bring corn next week? Guess what? They take an entire season to plant that stuff. It's a completely different conversation. If you're a grocer, how you work with groceries and what does that look like? It's a very different time where retailers and restaurants are like, what have you done for me lately? What happened this weekend? How this works. And so time is also another language that we also have to become very versed in on how we're communicating with our partners, because time affects all of us very, very differently.
He just said 2 things that, and I said that all the world to me is putting on a show, but he just said 2 things that really resonated with me. The number 1 way that you promote a show, the number 1 tool that does you any good is word of mouth. And I think we all live or die on word of mouth. If they talk about your development and say it's cool and it's great, then that's good word of mouth and customers will come. And the number 1 problem with tickets, with restaurant seats, not with real estate, but definitely with restaurants, is the product dies every day. It dies every day. The seat that I have tonight has no value tomorrow. If I didn't monetize it today, I'm down. And that's the problem, is that we have to get great word of mouth so that people will come to us, and we have to get it on a consistent basis so that we can monetize a product that dies at midnight.